The gunshot echoed through the Montana night like a crack of thunder, jolting Abigail Reynolds awake. She gathered her worn skirts and ran faster than she ever had before, her lungs burning in the crisp autumn air of 1878. Blood trickled down her arm, not her own, but her father's, the last memento of a man who died protecting her from the outlaws who descended upon their homestead. The silver moonlight revealed a small ranch in the distance, salvation perhaps, or another danger. Abigail had no choice. Her legs gave way as she reached the barn, and with the last of her strength, she pushed open the heavy wooden door and climbed the ladder to the hayloft, collapsing into the sweet-smelling straw as darkness claimed her. Samuel Blackwood had always been a light sleeper. The sound of his barn door creaking open in the dead of night had him reaching for the Winchester rifle he kept beside his bed. At 32, he'd survived long enough in Montana territory to know that nighttime visitors rarely brought good tidings. He lit a lantern and moved silently across his cabin, his footsteps practiced and sure. The cool night air bit at his skin as he stepped outside, rifle at the ready. The barn door stood slightly ajar. He never left it that way. Inside, the horses nickered softly, but nothing seemed amiss until he climbed the ladder to check the hayloft. The lantern light revealed a young woman, her dress torn and stained with blood, lying unconscious among the hay. Samuel set down his rifle and approached cautiously. She couldn't be more than 20, with auburn hair falling in tangled waves around a face pale as milk. He touched her shoulder gently. "Miss? Can you hear me?" Abigail's eyes flew open, wild with fear. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the barn wall, her breaths coming in sharp gasps. "Please," she whispered, "don't hurt me." Samuel raised his hands, showing they were empty. "I won't harm you. This is my ranch. I found you in my hayloft." She glanced frantically around, like a cornered animal seeking escape. "Rest easy," Samuel said softly, the way he might speak to a spooked horse. "You're safe here tonight." Abigail's eyes, green as spring grass, studied him warily. "They killed my father," she said, her voice breaking. "They'll be looking for me." "Who will?" "The Hargrove gang." The name hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Samuel's jaw tightened. Every rancher in 3 counties knew of the Hargroves' ruthless outlaws who'd been terrorizing the territory for months. "You need medical attention," he said, noticing the blood on her sleeve. "Can you walk?" She nodded uncertainly, and he helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. Together they descended the ladder, Samuel going first, ready to catch her if she fell. In his cabin, he built up the fire and heated water while Abigail sat rigidly in a chair, her eyes constantly moving to the windows and door. "I'm Samuel Blackwood," he said as he dampened a clean cloth. "This is my ranch, the Lone Pine." "Abigail Reynolds," she replied, wincing as he cleaned the blood from her arm. "My father and I had a homestead about 5 miles east." "I know the place," Samuel said. "Good water there." He examined her arm carefully. "The blood isn't yours?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "My father's. He told me to run while he... She couldn't finish. "You don't need to speak of it now," Samuel said. He moved to a trunk and pulled out a clean shirt and pair of trousers. "These will be too big, but they're dry and clean. You can change behind that screen. I'll make some coffee." While Abigail changed, Samuel stared out the window into the darkness, thinking. Harboring a woman being hunted by the Hargroves was dangerous business, but he'd never been one to turn away someone in need. His father had raised him better than that. When Abigail emerged, Samuel's clothes hanging loosely on her slender frame, he had coffee waiting. He also laid out bread, cheese, and dried beef. "Eat," he encouraged. "Then you should rest." Abigail hesitated before taking a small bite of bread. "I can't stay. I'm putting you in danger." "Where would you go tonight?" 5 miles to the nearest neighbor, and that's assuming the Hargroves aren't watching the trails. Samuel shook his head. "No, you'll stay here tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Samuel considered her question as he sipped his coffee. "Out here, we help each other. It's how we survive." He didn't mention how her presence had already stirred something in him, something he'd thought long buried after his wife Sarah died 3 years ago. Abigail ate slowly, fatigue evident in every movement. When she finished, Samuel showed her to his bed. "I'll sleep by the fire," he said when she protested. Get some rest. You're safe here. As Abigail sank into the first real bed she'd seen in days, Samuel added, I'm a light sleeper, and I keep my rifle close. Nothing will happen to you tonight. For the first time since her father's murder, Abigail felt the crushing weight of fear lift slightly. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Samuel, he corrected. Get some sleep, Abigail. Samuel sat in his chair by the fire, rifle across his knees, listening to the soft sound of Abigail's breathing as she fell into exhausted slumber. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, she was safe. That would have to be enough. The sun was barely cresting the eastern mountains when Abigail woke. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind. This wasn't her bed, her home. Then the memories crashed over her like a wave. Her father's blood, her desperate flight, the kind cowboy who'd given her shelter. Samuel was already awake, cooking breakfast at the small stove. The cabin smelled of coffee and frying bacon. Morning, he said when he noticed her watching him. Hungry? Abigail nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look hair-tangled, wearing his oversized clothes. She ran a hand self-consciously through her auburn locks. There's water in that basin if you want to wash up, Samuel said, turning back to his cooking. Breakfast will be ready soon. After washing her face and hands and doing her best to tame her hair, Abigail felt marginally more human. She sat at the table where Samuel placed a plate of bacon, beans, and biscuits before her. Thank you, she said, for everything. Samuel nodded as he took his own seat. You mentioned the Hargroves last night. What happened at your homestead? Abigail's appetite vanished as the memories surfaced. They came at dusk. 5 men. Said our land belonged to them now, that they'd filed a claim on it. Her hands trembled. My father showed them our deed, but they just laughed. Their leader Silas Hargrove shot the deed right out of Pa's hand. Samuel's expression darkened. Go on. Pa told me to run to the back room. I heard them arguing, then fighting. When I heard the gunshot, I couldn't stay hidden. I ran out and saw Pa on the floor, bleeding. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He looked at me and said, Run, Abby. So I did, through the back window. I ran until I couldn't anymore. Then I saw your barn. Samuel reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly. You did what you had to do to survive. Your father would be proud. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Samuel spoke again. The Hargroves have been trying to take over the whole valley. Several small ranchers have already sold out to them for a fraction of what their land is worth. What do they want with our land? It's just a small homestead. Water rights, Samuel said grimly. Your creek feeds into the main river. Control the water, control the valley. Abigail pushed her plate away. What do I do now? I can't go back there. First, we need to get word to the marshal in Fort Benton. Problem is, he's probably 2 days right away, and I can't leave you alone here. I could come with you, Abigail suggested. Samuel shook his head. Too risky. The Hargroves have men all over. They'd spot us on the open trail. A plan began forming in his mind. I have a neighbor, widow named Mrs. Jenkins, about 3 miles west. She could stay with you while I ride to Fort Benton. I don't want to impose on anyone else, Mrs. Jenkins would welcome the company, Samuel assured her. And she's a crack shot with a shotgun. No one bothers her. Abigail nodded reluctantly. When would we go? Today. I need to check on my herd first, then we'll ride over to Mrs. Jenkins. After breakfast, Samuel gave Abigail some of his late wife's clothes from a trunk he kept. Sarah was about your size, he said, his voice softening at the name. These should fit better than mine. Abigail accepted the simple cotton dress and undergarments gratefully. Was Sarah your wife? Samuel nodded. She died 3 years ago. Fever took her before the doctor could even get here. I'm sorry, Abigail said, recognizing the pain in his eyes, the same pain she felt when thinking of her father. Life out here is hard, Samuel said simply. But it's all I know. While Samuel went to check his cattle, Abigail washed the breakfast dishes and tidied the cabin. It was a simple place, 1 room with a bed, table, chairs, stove, and a few trunks for storage. But it was clean and solid, with small touches that spoke of care. Dried wildflowers in a jar, books stacked neatly on a shelf, a handmade quilt on the bed. Through the window, she could see Samuel in the distance, riding among his cattle. He sat tall in the saddle, at home on horseback in a way that reminded her of her father. The thought brought fresh pain, but also determination. The Hargroves would pay for what they'd done. When Samuel returned, he found Abigail wearing Sarah's blue dress, her hair neatly braided. For a moment, he stood in the doorway, struck by the sight of a woman in his cabin again after so long. "The dress fits well," he said, clearing his throat. "We should get going if we want to reach Mrs. Jenkins by midday." Samuel saddled 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding, and a gentle mare for Abigail. He packed saddlebags with supplies and strapped his Winchester rifle to his saddle. "Can you ride?" he asked as he helped her mount. "Yes," Abigail said. "Pa taught me when I was young." They set off at a steady pace, keeping to the tree lines and away from open country where they might be spotted. Samuel rode slightly ahead, constantly scanning the horizon for danger. "Your ranch is beautiful," Abigail said as they crossed a small stream. The land around them rolled in gentle hills, golden with autumn grasses and dotted with pine trees. "It's not much compared to some," Samuel replied. "But the land is good, and I've built it up from nothing." "How long have you been here?" 8 years. Came out from Pennsylvania with Sarah right after we married. Started with 10 head of cattle and that cabin. Now I've got nearly 100 head and 50 acres of my own." Pride was evident in his voice, and Abigail found herself admiring his accomplishment. Creating something from nothing in this harsh country took courage and determination. "My father had the same dream," she said. "He brought me out here from Ohio after my mother died. Said we'd build something that would last generations." Samuel glanced back at her, noting the grief and anger in her expression. "We'll make sure his dream doesn't die with him," he said firmly. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in thought. Abigail found herself studying Samuel, the broad set of his shoulders, the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair, the gentle way he handled his horse. He was nothing like the few men who had courted her back in Ohio. Those had been town boys with soft hands and rehearsed compliments. Samuel Blackwood was solid and real, shaped by the land he worked. As they crested a hill, Samuel suddenly raised his hand, signaling Abigail to stop. He dismounted silently, gesturing for her to do the same. "What is it?" she whispered as they crouched behind their horses. "Riders," Samuel murmured, pointing to a distant cloud of dust on the trail below. 4 or maybe 5. Abigail's heart pounded. "The Hargroves?" "Can't tell yet. Stay down." They watched as the riders came into view, 5 men moving at a purposeful trot. Even from a distance, Abigail recognized the man in front. "That's Silas Hargrove," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The one who shot my father." Samuel's expression hardened as he studied the men. "They're heading toward my place. Must be tracking you." "I've brought trouble to your door," Abigail said miserably. "It was already there," Samuel replied. "The Hargroves have had their eye on my water rights too." They waited until the riders were out of sight before continuing, now taking a more circuitous route to Mrs. Jenkins' homestead. The encounter had shaken Abigail, bringing back the terror of her escape. Samuel noticed her pallor. "We're almost there," he assured her. "Mrs. Jenkins will look after you. I'll head to Fort Benton straight from her place." The Jenkins homestead came into view, a neat cabin with a small barn and vegetable garden. Smoke curled from the chimney, and chickens pecked in the yard. Mrs. Jenkins herself appeared at the door as they rode up, a stout woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and a no-nonsense expression that softened when she recognized Samuel. "Samuel Blackwood, as I live and breathe," she called. "What brings you my way?" Samuel quickly explained the situation as they dismounted. Mrs. Jenkins listened grimly, her eyes flicking to Abigail with sympathy. "Of course she can stay," the older woman said without hesitation. "Those Hargrove devils need to be taught a lesson. Come inside, child. You look dead on your feet." Abigail turned to Samuel, suddenly reluctant to let him leave. "Be careful," she said. "They'll be watching the trails." "I know every back path in these mountains," he assured her. "I'll be fine. Stay with Mrs. Jenkins until I return with the marshal." On impulse, Abigail reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for saving my life." Samuel's expression softened. "You rest easy now. I'll be back before you know it." As he mounted his horse and rode away, Abigail felt a strange emptiness, as if something vital had gone with him. Mrs. Jenkins put a comforting arm around her shoulders. "Come along, dear. I've got stew on the stove and a spare bed made up. You can tell me everything while we eat." Inside the cozy cabin, Abigail found herself pouring out the whole terrible story to the kind widow. Mrs. Jenkins listened without interruption, her weathered face showing only compassion. "You've been through an ordeal, no doubt about it," she said when Abigail finished. "But you're safe here for now. Samuel is a good man, the best in these parts. If anyone can bring help, it's him. Have you known him long?" Abigail asked, curious about the cowboy who'd shown her such kindness. "Since he first came to this valley. My Harold was still alive then, God rest his soul. We helped Samuel and Sarah get settled." Mrs. Jenkins sighed. "Nearly broke him when Sarah died. Didn't speak to anyone for months. Just worked himself half to death on that ranch. He mentioned she died of fever," Abigail said. Mrs. Jenkins nodded. "Influenza. Swept through the valley one winter. Took my Harold too, and 3 others besides." She studied Abigail's face. "Samuel's carried that grief a long time. First time I've seen him look at a woman the way he looked at you." Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. He was just being kind. Kind, yes, but there was more than kindness in his eyes. Mrs. Jenkins smiled knowingly. "You get some rest now. We'll keep watch together until he returns." That night, as Abigail lay in the spare bed, her thoughts kept returning to Samuel riding alone through dangerous country, risking his life for a woman he barely knew. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of gunshots and her father's voice telling her to run. Dawn found her helping Mrs. Jenkins with chores, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, tending the garden. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her worries. "You're no stranger to hard work," Mrs. Jenkins observed approvingly as Abigail hauled water from the well. "Pa believed in teaching me everything," Abigail replied. "Said a woman on the frontier needed to handle anything that came her way. Your father was a wise man." The day passed slowly. Mrs. Jenkins taught Abigail to make soap from lye and rendered fat, showed her how to preserve vegetables for winter, and kept up a steady stream of stories about the valley and its inhabitants. "The Hargroves only showed up last spring," she explained as they shelled peas on the porch. "Came from Wyoming with bags of money and mean looks. Started buying up land, then got greedy and took to intimidating folks who wouldn't sell. Hasn't anyone stood up to them? A few tried. Most ended up leaving if they were lucky. 2 were found dead in mysterious accidents." Mrs. Jenkins spat the word. "Marshall's been too busy with Indian troubles to pay much mind, and the Hargroves are careful to keep most of their dirt hidden." As evening approached, both women grew increasingly anxious about Samuel. Fort Benton was a full day's ride each way, but if he'd pushed hard, he might return by nightfall. They were washing dishes after supper when they heard hoofbeats approaching, multiple horses moving fast. Mrs. Jenkins grabbed her shotgun from above the door. "Get in the root cellar," she ordered Abigail. "Trapdoors under the rug in my bedroom. Don't come out until I call you." "I can't leave you alone. No time to argue, girl. Go." Abigail reluctantly obeyed, lifting the rug and slipping down into the cool darkness of the root cellar. She pulled the trapdoor closed just as she heard pounding at the cabin door. From below, she could hear muffled voices, Mrs. Jenkins' defiant tone, and deeper male voices she didn't recognize. Then a name that made her blood run cold: Silas Hargrove. "Know you're harboring the Reynolds girl," a man's voice said, loud enough to penetrate the floorboards. "Make this easy on yourself, widow." "I don't know what you're talking about," Mrs. Jenkins replied. "I live alone. Always have since my Harold passed. We tracked Blackwood here earlier today. Where is he now? His business is his own. Now get off my property before I ventilate your hides." Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. They knew Samuel had brought her here. They were tracking him. What if they found him on the trail alone? The conversation continued above, growing more heated. Then a crash, as if furniture had been overturned. "Search the place," Hargrove ordered. Heavy footsteps moved across the floor. Abigail pressed herself against the earthen wall of the cellar, barely breathing. The rug above was pulled aside. She could see light through the cracks in the trapdoor. "What's this?" a gruff voice asked. "Root cellar," Mrs. Jenkins answered, her voice tight. "For storing vegetables." "Open it. It's empty this time of year. Harvest isn't in yet. Open it, or I will." Abigail looked frantically around the dark cellar for a weapon, finding only a rusty garden fork. She gripped it tightly as the trapdoor began to lift. Suddenly, Gunshots erupted outside the cabin. The trapdoor slammed shut as the men above rushed to the windows. "It's Blackwood," someone shouted. "And he's got the marshal with him." More gunfire followed, along with shouts and the neighing of frightened horses. Abigail remained frozen in place, the garden fork clutched in white-knuckled hands as the battle raged above. Minutes stretched like hours before silence fell. Then footsteps again, and Mrs. Jenkins' voice calling, "Abigail? It's safe now, child. Come on up." Trembling, Abigail pushed open the trapdoor and climbed out. The cabin was in disarray, chairs overturned, Mrs. Jenkins' precious china shattered on the floor. But the widow herself stood intact, shotgun still in hand, a fierce grin on her face. And beside her stood Samuel, his shirt torn and a smear of blood on his cheek, but wonderfully, gloriously alive. "Samuel." Without thinking, Abigail threw herself into his arms. He stiffened in surprise for a moment before his arms came around her, strong and secure. "You're safe," he murmured against her hair. "I got here just in time." Abigail pulled back, suddenly aware of their audience, not just Mrs. Jenkins, but a tall man wearing a marshal's badge and 2 deputies. "Marshal Taylor," Samuel introduced. "He brought reinforcements. We've been wanting to take down the Hargroves for months," the marshal explained. "Just needed someone willing to testify against them." "I'll testify," Abigail said firmly. "I saw Silas Hargrove murder my father." The marshal nodded approvingly. "That's what Samuel told me. We captured 3 of them, including Silas. 2 got away, but my deputies will round them up." "What happens now?" Abigail asked. "Now," said the marshal, "you come to Fort Benton to make your statement. The Hargroves will face trial for murder, intimidation, and land fraud." Mrs. Jenkins insisted everyone stay the night, as darkness had fallen completely. While the marshal and his deputies set up camp outside with their prisoners, Mrs. Jenkins prepared a late meal for Samuel and Abigail. "You're hurt," Abigail said, noticing Samuel wince as he sat down. "Just a graze," he assured her. "One of them got lucky." Nevertheless, she insisted on cleaning the wound. A bullet had grazed his upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow. As she washed away the blood with gentle hands, Samuel watched her face, noting the concentration in her green eyes. "I was worried about you," she admitted softly. "When I heard them say they'd tracked you, I worried about you too," Samuel replied. "Rode back as fast as I could once the marshal agreed to come." Their eyes met, and something passed between them: understanding, connection, possibility. Mrs. Jenkins, busying herself at the stove, pretended not to notice, but a small smile played at her lips. The next morning, they all set out for Fort Benton, the marshal and deputies with their prisoners, and Samuel riding alongside Abigail. Mrs. Jenkins had hugged her fiercely before they left. "You come back and visit when this is all over," the widow had insisted. "And bring that cowboy with you." The journey to Fort Benton took most of the day. Abigail found herself riding close to Samuel, drawing comfort from his solid presence. They talked as they rode about their childhoods, their dreams, the land they both loved. "What will you do after the trial?" Samuel asked as the town came into view, a collection of buildings nestled against the Missouri River. Abigail had been pondering this question since her world collapsed. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to the homestead alone. I don't have the resources to work it properly." "You could sell it," Samuel suggested, though something in his tone suggested he didn't like the idea. "It would feel like letting the Hargroves win, even if they're in jail." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "What if you had help?" Abigail looked at him questioningly. "Your land adjoins mine to the east," he said, keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. "Together, they'd make a fine ranch. Plenty of water, good grazing." Abigail's heart quickened. "What exactly are you suggesting, Samuel Blackwood?" Now he did look at her, his eyes serious. "I'm not suggesting anything yet. It's too soon for that. But I am saying you have options, Abigail. And I'd like to be one of them." The days in Fort Benton passed in a blur of depositions and legal proceedings. Abigail stayed at the hotel, her expenses covered by the marshal's office. Samuel remained in town as well, ostensibly to give his own testimony, but Abigail knew he was staying to support her. Each evening, he would call on her, and they would walk along the riverfront or share supper at the hotel restaurant. Under different circumstances, it might have been considered courting. One evening, a week after their arrival, Samuel brought news. The marshal's men caught the last of the Hargroves, he told her as they sat on a bench overlooking the Missouri. The trial is set for next month. That's good, Abigail said, though the prospect of reliving her father's murder in a courtroom filled her with dread. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel took her hand. You don't have to face it alone. His hand was warm and calloused, a working man's hand. Abigail found herself holding onto it like a lifeline. I've been thinking about what you said, she began hesitantly. About our lands adjoining. Samuel waited, giving her space to continue. I don't want to sell my father's land. It was his dream, but I can't work it alone. She took a deep breath. Would a partnership be possible? Between neighbors? Samuel's expression remained carefully neutral. What kind of partnership did you have in mind? A business arrangement, to start. I have the land and water rights. You have the cattle and experience. Abigail felt her cheeks warming. Beyond that, I don't know. It's too soon, like you said. A slow smile spread across Samuel's face. I think that's a fine idea, Abigail Reynolds. A partnership between neighbors. The way he said it made it clear he was hoping for more than a business arrangement, eventually. And to her surprise, Abigail found herself hoping for the same. The trial of the Hargrove gang became the talk of the territory. Ranchers and farmers from 3 counties came to testify about intimidation, theft, and fraud. Abigail's testimony about her father's murder sealed their fate. Silas Hargrove and his men were sentenced to hang. Justice had been served, but it brought Abigail little comfort. As she packed her few belongings in the hotel room, preparing to leave Fort Benton, the future still seemed uncertain. A knock at her door revealed Samuel, hat in hand. Ready to go home? He asked. Home. The word caught in her heart. Where was home now? Reading her expression, Samuel added, I thought you might stay at my place for a while. Until we figure out our partnership. Mrs. Jenkins offered her home too, if you'd prefer. Your place is closer to my father's land, Abigail said practically. It makes more sense if we're going to work together. If Samuel was pleased by her decision, he hit it well, simply nodding and taking her bag. I've got supplies loaded. We can make it back by nightfall if we start now. The journey back seemed shorter somehow, the landscape more welcoming. As they approached Samuel's ranch, Abigail felt a strange sense of homecoming, as if the small cabin nestled against the pines was already familiar. It's not much, Samuel said as they dismounted, but I've been thinking of adding on. A proper bedroom, maybe a bigger kitchen. It's perfect as it is, Abigail assured him. Cozy. In the weeks that followed, they settled into a routine. Samuel insisted Abigail take the bed while he slept on a pallet by the fire. During the days, they worked side by side, tending cattle, repairing fences, preparing for winter. Samuel taught Abigail about ranching, while she contributed knowledge of crops and gardening she'd learned from her father. They rode to her father's homestead together to bury him properly and retrieve what belongings they could salvage. The cabin had been ransacked by the Hargroves, but Samuel helped her clean and secure it, though neither suggested she should stay there alone. As autumn deepened toward winter, their partnership flourished. Samuel's cattle grazed on the combined pastures, and they made plans for spring planting. More importantly, something else was growing between them, a deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared hardship, and beneath that, something warmer that neither had yet put into words. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the land in white silence. Abigail stood at the cabin window, watching fat flakes swirl in the lantern light as Samuel came in from checking the livestock. Storm's setting in, he said, stamping snow from his boots. Might be snowed in for a few days. Abigail handed him a cup of hot coffee. I made stew for supper. And biscuits. Samuel smiled as he took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. You've made this place a home again, he said quietly. I didn't realize how empty it was until you filled it. They ate by lamplight, the fire crackling in the stove, wind whistling around the eaves. The small cabin felt like a safe harbor in the storm. After supper, Samuel surprised her by pulling a battered fiddle from a trunk. My father taught me, he explained as he tuned it. Haven't played much since Sarah died. The sweet, mournful notes filled the cabin as he played an old folk song. Abigail watched his hands, strong and sure on the strings, and felt something inside her shift like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. When he finished, she applauded softly. That was beautiful. Samuel set the fiddle aside, his expression serious. Abigail, there's something I need to say. Her heart quickened. Yes. This partnership we've started, it's working well. Better than I hoped. I think so too. But I find myself wanting more than a business arrangement. Samuel moved to sit beside her at the table. I know it's been less than 2 months since you lost your father. I know you're still healing. But I also know that life out here is uncertain, and when you find something worth holding on to, you shouldn't wait. Abigail's breath caught as he took her hand. I'm falling in love with you, Abigail Reynolds, Samuel said simply. I think I started falling that first night when I found you in my hayloft. I'm not asking for promises yet, just a chance to court you properly when you're ready. Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of hearing him speak the feelings she'd been harboring herself. Samuel Blackwood, she said, squeezing his hand, I would like nothing better than to be courted by you. And I don't think we need to wait. Life is too precious and too short. The joy that transformed his face was worth any uncertainty she might have felt. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Samuel leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened when she responded. When they parted, both were smiling. Outside, the snow continued to fall, insulating them from the world beyond their small cabin. Within, something new had begun to grow, a love built on respect, shared purpose, and the quiet understanding that sometimes home isn't a place, but a person. Winter on the Montana frontier was harsh and unforgiving, but for Abigail and Samuel, the cold months were a blessing in disguise. Snowed in for days at a time, they had no choice but to grow closer, learning each other's habits, preferences, stories, and dreams. Samuel formally courted Abigail with a sweetness that touched her deeply. He carved wooden trinkets for her during the long evenings, a delicate hair comb, a small box for her few pieces of jewelry, a set of chess pieces so they could play together by the fire. He read to her from his small collection of books, his deep voice bringing the words to life. In turn, Abigail transformed the bachelor cabin into a true home. She sewed curtains from fabric Mrs. Jenkins had given her, braided a rug for the floor, and used her mother's recipes to fill the cabin with the sense of home, baked bread and apple pies made from preserved fruit. They planned for the future as winter held them in its grip, sketching additions to the cabin, plotting where to plant crops come spring, discussing how many head of cattle the combined lands could support. We should build a proper bridge across the creek, Samuel suggested one evening as they pored over a rough map he'd drawn. Join our lands physically as well as on paper. And a new barn, Abigail added. Bigger than either of ours. Right in the middle. Samuel looked up from the map, his expression tender. You're really planning to stay then? Abigail met his gaze steadily. Wild horses couldn't drag me away, Samuel Blackwood. The kiss that followed sealed a promise neither needed to put into words. On Christmas Eve, with snow piled high around the cabin and stars glittering like diamonds in the clear night sky, Samuel built up the fire and brought out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. I've been saving this, he said, suddenly looking nervous as he handed it to Abigail. It was my mother's. Curious, Abigail unwrapped the package to find a small velvet box. Inside nestled a simple gold ring with a single pearl. It's not fancy, Samuel said. Not a diamond like city women wear. But it's been in my family for 3 generations. Abigail looked up, her heart in her throat, as Samuel knelt before her. Abigail Reynolds, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards. But out here, we measure time differently. We measure it in shared work, in meals taken together, in dangers faced and overcome. He took her hand in his. I love you. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Abigail's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Samuel. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added, my father would have liked you. Samuel smiled. I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of both you and his memory. They agreed to marry in the spring, when travel was easier and friends could attend. The engagement made their living arrangement slightly scandalous by Eastern standards, but frontier practicality won out. Abigail continued to take the bed while Samuel slept by the fire, though both found the arrangement increasingly difficult as their feelings deepened. January brought the coldest days of the year, with temperatures dropping so low that the creek froze solid and the cattle huddled together in the barn for warmth. Samuel and Abigail took turns checking on the animals day and night, ensuring none succumbed to the bitter cold. During one such night check, a blizzard blew in suddenly, the kind old-timers called a white death. Samuel was caught in the barn, unable to see the cabin just 50 yards away through the swirling snow. He settled in for the night among the cattle, knowing Abigail would be worried but unable to risk the short journey back. Inside the cabin, Abigail paced anxiously, keeping the fire roaring and a lantern burning in the window as a beacon. When dawn broke and the storm subsided, she pulled on Samuel's heavy coat and struggled through waist-deep snow to the barn. She found him half-frozen but alive, having kept warm by nestling between two cows. Together they made their way back to the cabin, where Abigail helped him out of his frozen clothes and into bed, piling every blanket they owned on top of him. "Don't you dare scare me like that again," she scolded as she rubbed his hands between hers, trying to restore circulation. "Wouldn't dream of it," Samuel replied through chattering teeth. "I was just thinking, lying there in the barn, that I couldn't die because I hadn't married you yet." "That's right," Abigail said firmly. "You made me a promise, Samuel Blackwood, and I expect you to keep it." His recovery took several days, during which Abigail nursed him tenderly, setting aside their usual propriety out of necessity. By the time he was well enough to resume his pallet by the fire, something had shifted between them, a deeper intimacy born of shared vulnerability. February brought slightly milder weather and their first visitors since before Christmas, Mrs. Jenkins and her brother, arriving by sleigh with supplies from town and welcome news from the outside world. "The Hargrove boys were hanged last month," Mrs. Jenkins reported as they sat around the table enjoying coffee and Abigail's fresh bread. Not a soul spoke in their defense. "And the land they stole?" Samuel asked. "Being returned to the rightful owners where possible," Mrs. Jenkins' brother, a lawyer from Helena, explained. "Or sold at fair prices where the owners have moved on." They also brought a letter for Abigail from the county clerk, confirming her inheritance of her father's homestead and its water rights. The official document felt like the final piece falling into place, securing their future together. When Abigail showed the visitors her engagement ring, Mrs. Jenkins whooped with delight. "I knew it. Didn't I tell you, Abigail? I saw the way he looked at you that very first day." The older woman insisted on helping plan the wedding, which they set for the first Saturday in May. "We'll have it at my place," she declared. "I've got the room, and it's right between your two properties." Symbolic, like. As winter gradually loosened its grip on the land, Samuel and Abigail began the work of truly joining their properties. With the help of neighbors, they constructed a sturdy bridge across the creek that separated their lands. The physical connection seemed to embody their union, two separate entities becoming one, yet each maintaining its own character. April brought warm winds and the first wildflowers. The wedding preparations accelerated as the date approached. Abigail sewed her wedding dress from fine fabric Mrs. Jenkins ordered from Helena, ivory cotton, with lace trim, simple but elegant. Samuel had a new suit made in Fort Benton and polished his father's pocket watch until it gleamed. The night before their wedding, they sat together on the porch of the cabin that had become their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Samuel had officially moved into the barn 2 weeks earlier, a concession to propriety, as neighbors began visiting more frequently with the improved weather. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his hand warm around hers. Abigail considered the question. "Not about marrying you," she said honestly, "but a little about the ceremony itself. I've never liked being the center of attention." Samuel smiled. "Just look at me. Pretend it's just the two of us. What about you? Any second thoughts?" "Only one," he said seriously. Abigail's heart skipped a beat. "What's that?" "I'm regretting that we didn't get married the day after I proposed. These months of waiting have been torture." She laughed, relieved. "Just one more night, Mr. Blackwood. One more night, Miss Reynolds." He kissed her softly. Then forever. Their wedding day dawned clear and warm, as if nature itself approved of the union. Neighbors from miles around gathered at Mrs. Jenkins' homestead, bringing food, flowers, and well wishes. The local minister rode in from Fort Benton, and someone had even arranged for a photographer to capture the occasion, a rare luxury on the frontier. Abigail prepared in Mrs. Jenkins' bedroom, the older woman fussing over her hair and dress like a mother hen. "Something borrowed," Mrs. Jenkins said, fastening a cameo brooch to Abigail's collar. "It was my grandmother's." There was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Jenkins' brother entered. "Everything's ready," he said. "And Abigail, I'd be honored to walk you down the aisle, if you'll have me." Tears threatened to spill as Abigail nodded gratefully. She had worried about this moment, the absence of her father on what should have been one of the happiest days of her life. "He'd be so proud of you," Mrs. Jenkins whispered, squeezing her hand. "And so happy you found a good man." The ceremony took place under an arch of pine boughs in Mrs. Jenkins' front yard. When Abigail emerged from the house on the lawyer's arm, her eyes immediately found Samuel, standing tall and handsome in his new suit, looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. In that moment, all her nervousness vanished. She walked steadily toward her future, heart full to bursting with love and certainty. The minister's words were traditional, but the setting was pure Montana mountains in the distance, pine trees swaying in the breeze, neighbors gathered in a circle of support. When Samuel took her hands in his voice never wavered as he recited his vows. "I, Samuel Blackwood, take you, Abigail Reynolds, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Abigail's voice was soft but clear as she repeated her own vows, meaning every word from the depths of her soul. "By the power vested in me," the minister concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Samuel's kiss was gentle but thorough, drawing chuckles and a few whoops from their audience. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, Abigail felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a warm blanket. The celebration continued into the evening, a feast spread on long tables, music from fiddles and a harmonica, dancing under the stars. Samuel and Abigail moved through it all in a happy daze, accepting congratulations and blessings from everyone. As darkness fell, they slipped away from the festivities, riding back to their cabin in the silver moonlight. Samuel had spent the previous week adding final touches to the bedroom addition he'd built through the winter, a wedding present for his bride. At the door of their home, he swept Abigail into his arms, carrying her across the threshold with ease. Inside, candles flickered on every surface, casting a warm glow over the familiar space that now held new promise. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," Samuel murmured against her hair. Later, as they lay tangled together in the quiet darkness of their marriage bed, Abigail traced the outline of Samuel's face with gentle fingers. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she whispered. "After my father died, I thought my life was over, but you gave me a new one." Samuel kissed her palm. "You saved me too, Abigail. I was existing, not living, before you came along." "We saved each other," she agreed. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, pattering on the roof, nature's blessing on their union and promise of fertility for the land they loved. Spring melted into summer, and the newly formed Blackwood Ranch thrived under their combined care. The cattle grew fat on the lush grass. The vegetable garden Samuel had expanded yielded more than they could eat, and the bridge across the creek became a symbol of their united lands and lives. By July, Abigail suspected she was carrying their first child. When the doctor from Fort Benton confirmed it during his monthly circuit, Samuel's joy knew no bounds. He immediately began building a cradle from pine harvested on their own land. "Boy or girl, this child will have the best of both of us," he declared as he worked, wood shavings curling around his boots. "And the best of this land," Abigail added, her hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly. "Freedom, strength, beauty." The community celebrated their news, with Mrs. Jenkins appointing herself honorary grandmother. "That child will want for nothing," she promised, already knitting tiny garments for the winter birth. As Abigail's pregnancy progressed, Samuel grew increasingly protective, taking on more of the physical labor despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing her usual chores. "Humor me," he would say when she objected to being treated like fragile china. "I've waited my whole life for this family. Let me take care of you both." The baby kicked for the first time on a warm September evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a strong flutter that made Abigail gasp and grab Samuel's hand, placing it on her rounded belly. "That's our child," she whispered as the baby kicked again, as if in greeting to its father. Samuel's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "We're waiting for you." As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, they prepared for both the coming winter and the baby's arrival. Samuel finished the final addition to the cabin, a small nursery adjoining their bedroom, with a window facing east so the morning sun would warm it. Abigail sewed baby clothes and quilts, preserved the garden's harvest, and helped plan for the cattle through the winter months. Despite her advancing pregnancy, she insisted on remaining active, though she did allow Samuel to take over the more strenuous tasks. Winter arrived earlier than the previous year, with the first snow falling in late October. By December, Abigail's time was drawing near, and Samuel arranged for a midwife to stay with them until the birth. Mrs. Jenkins came too, bringing her warmth and practical wisdom to the household. On the shortest day of the year, December 21st, 1879, Abigail went into labor as the sun was setting. Through the long night, Samuel remained by her side, wiping her brow, holding her hands, murmuring encouragement as she worked to bring their child into the world. Just as dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains, sending the first golden rays through the nursery window, their daughter was born, a strong, healthy girl with a lusty cry and a thatch of dark hair like her father's. "Sarah Elizabeth Blackwood," Abigail whispered as she cradled her newborn, honoring both Samuel's first wife and her own mother in the naming. Samuel, overcome with emotion, could only nod as he gazed at his wife and daughter, the family he had once thought lost to him forever, now miraculously restored in new form. Mrs. Jenkins wiped tears from her weathered cheeks. "A solstice baby," she said approvingly. "Born on the darkest day, bringing light back to the world. That's powerful medicine, that is." The first months of 1880 passed in a blur of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and the profound wonder of watching their daughter discover the world. Despite the winter isolation, the cabin had never felt more alive, filled with baby sounds and the deep contentment of family life. As spring arrived, bringing new growth to the land, Samuel and Abigail celebrated their first wedding anniversary. They stood on the bridge spanning the creek that had once divided their properties, little Sarah bundled warmly in her mother's arms. "1 year ago, I made the best decision of my life," Samuel said, wrapping his arm around his wife's shoulders. "And to think it all started because I slept in your hayloft," Abigail replied with a smile. Samuel's expression grew serious. "I meant what I said that night, you know. Rest easy, you're safe here tonight. I'll spend my life making sure you and Sarah always feel that way." "We do," Abigail assured him, leaning into his embrace. "This is our home, our land, our life together." Below them, the creek gurgled, swollen with spring melt, carrying water from one part of their ranch to another, uniting rather than dividing, nurturing the land just as their love nurtured each other. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing family. Sarah was joined by a brother, James, 2 years later, and eventually by another sister, Margaret, completing their family. The Blackwood Ranch prospered under their stewardship, expanding gradually as neighboring properties became available. Samuel's expertise with cattle combined with Abigail's innovative crop rotations created a model operation that others in the territory sought to emulate. They weathered hardships: 2 drought years when the creek ran low, harsh winters when they lost cattle to the cold, a fire that destroyed the original barn but miraculously spared the cabin. Through it all, their partnership remained unshakable, each challenge faced together making them stronger. As their children grew, Abigail and Samuel taught them everything they knew, not just about ranching and homesteading, but about love, resilience, and the value of community. Sarah inherited her father's way with horses, James showed Abigail's talent for growing things, and little Margaret revealed a gift for storytelling that kept the family entertained through long winter evenings. Mrs. Jenkins remained a beloved fixture in their lives until her peaceful passing at the age of 78. They buried her on a gentle slope overlooking both their ranch and what had been her homestead, which now belonged to her niece and her family. On the 20th anniversary of the night Abigail had first sought refuge in Samuel's hayloft, they hosted a gathering of friends and neighbors, many of whom had been with them since the beginning, others who had arrived in the valley more recently. After the feast, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Samuel and Abigail slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand to the old barn where their story had begun. The original hayloft was still there, though the barn had been expanded and improved over the years. Samuel climbed the ladder first, then helped Abigail up, both of them laughing at their less nimble middle-aged bodies. "Remember how terrified you were when I found you?" Samuel asked as they settled in the sweet-smelling hay. "I thought you might be one of them, the Hargroves," Abigail replied. "Until you spoke." "Rest easy," Samuel quoted himself. "You're safe here tonight." "I believed you instantly," Abigail said, leaning against his shoulder. "Something in your voice just reached me, even through my fear." "I knew the moment I saw you that my life had changed," Samuel admitted. "I just didn't know how completely." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the celebration continuing in the distance, their children's laughter, the music of fiddles, the murmur of conversation. "We've built something good here," Abigail said eventually. "Something that will last." Samuel nodded, his arm tightening around her. "Better than good. Something magnificent." As stars began to appear in the deepening twilight, they descended from the hayloft and walked back toward the lights of home, where their children and friends awaited. The path was familiar beneath their feet, worn smooth by 20 years of shared journeys back and forth across land that had once been divided but was now, irrevocably, one. Behind them, the barn stood solid against the Montana sky, a reminder of that fateful night when a desperate young woman had sought shelter and found, instead, a love that would sustain her for a lifetime. And ahead of them stretched the future, not just their own, but that of their children and the generations that would follow, all because once, long ago, she slept in his hayloft, and the cowboy said, "Rest easy, you're safe here tonight."